Over the last year, we have dove deep into the story of Black Ops 4, relating it to Black Ops 3, and kind of expanding on how the two stories really fit together, diving into individual specialist characters, theories, and everything in between. And over this time, it has kind of left myself with one question. And that question is, why are there so many damn plot holes? And the biggest example of this is if you look at the characters' birthdays. The characters' birthdays between Black Ops 3 and Black Ops 4 are exactly the same, but 23 years apart. The birthdays in Black Ops 4 are exactly 23 years earlier than they were in Black Ops 3. And we came up with many reasons as to why this could be, whether it changed, whether these characters we are looking at in Black Ops 4 are actually archetypes, but today we actually have a definitive answer. And that answer comes from a man named Jason Schrier. He's a writer for Kotaku, and earlier, a couple weeks ago, he actually put out an article explaining how Sledgehammer is no longer going to be the maker of Call of Duty 2020, and that is now going to be in Treyarch's hands. Well, this week he actually put out another article talking about the development cycle of Black Ops 4, Black Ops 3, and how messy it became, and what actually happened to the campaign in not just Black Ops 4, but also Black Ops 3. Now, this article actually has some really good sources. The people that Jason Schrier actually interviewed for this are QA testers at Treyarch and some employees of Treyarch that want to remain anonymous for obvious reasons. And this story begins back in Black Ops 3. In Black Ops 3, the campaign that we know and not many of us love is not actually all you thought it was. Halfway through the development cycle of Black Ops 3, all the employees were brought into a meeting and they were told that the entire campaign that they've been working on for nearly a year and a half had been scrapped. This campaign was not the same as the one that you are watching here, nor was it the same as a traditional Call of Duty campaign. It was actually supposed to be an open world campaign that you could travel around this vast world completing missions in the order that you please. However, this was scrapped and later replaced by the traditional linear Call of Duty campaign and the campaign that you're watching on screen here. Now, personally for me, a guy who's played Call of Duty for over 10 years of his life, that sounds incredibly interesting to me. I would love to see an open world campaign in a Call of Duty game just to see how it would work, how well it would play, but of course, we never got to see what that actually looked like. Now, apparently the term history repeats itself is more than an understatement at Treyarch, because almost the exact same time in the next development cycle, nearly the same thing happened. In early 2018, before the launch of Black Ops 4, everyone was brought into a meeting room and told that the campaign that they had now been working on for not a year and a half, but 2 years was being scrapped. This campaign that they were working on was a 2 versus 2 campaign like nothing we've ever seen before. So how did this campaign work? It's very different than anything we've seen before. Basically, it took place in a post-apocalyptic land that took place after the events of Black Ops 3. Teams would compete to complete certain objectives. For example, a team of 2 would be tasked to defend a journalist, while the other team of 2 would be tasked to actually assassinate that journalist. Or one team would be tasked to take out a convoy, while the other team would be tasked to actually protect it. And there were options throughout the gameplay to defect to the other side if you didn't like the choices your teammates were making. Now, before the Christmas of 2017, the team put together a demo, working hard to finish it, and shipped it to the Treyarch higher-ups at the very beginning of their Christmas break. They went away to Vegas for their Treyarch year-end party, and upon returning in the new year, they were told that this was supposed to be completely scrapped and to start from scratch. Now, in the defense of the higher-ups at Treyarch, I do have to say, based off of what all of the QA testers in this article say, and even the developers themselves, apparently this 2 versus 2 campaign was incredibly boring and repetitive, and they didn't think a lot of people would like it, even after they shipped off that demo. So it wasn't really a shock when this happened, but you still have a year left in your development and have nothing completed. Now, here's the kicker. Not only was the entire campaign scrapped, but the entire idea for the whole game of Black Ops 4 as well. You see, Black Ops 4 was supposed to be a sequel to Black Ops 3, taking place right after the events of Black Ops 3 and a kind of post-apocalyptic future. However, the development studio was then tasked to make a video game as a prequel to Black Ops 3 called Black Ops 4, the title in itself not really making any sense. This would explain why there are so many plot holes revolving around the timeline of the specialist characters like we talked about before. Now this actually explains a lot. It explains why there were so many features at the launch of Black Ops 4 missing, things like contracts that were in Black Ops 3, hero gear, certain individual little features that were in the previous Call of Duty game but are not in its predecessor. On top of this, it brings up a big question about Blackout. As it turns out, when the campaign for Black Ops 4 was scrapped at the beginning of 2018, that is when Blackout was decided to be put into the game. Before that point, it wasn't even an idea for the studio of Treyarch to actually be making a Battle Royale game. This is something that they had to build from the ground up in less than 9 months before the beta came out. Which is pretty ridiculous because honestly, at this point in the life cycle of Black Ops 4, Blackout is what I play more than anything else. I really do truly enjoy it, and for this to be created in 9 months, to me, is pretty damn impressive. It also explains why at the launch of the game, for a couple of months, there was really no additional content added into Blackout, and now that they've had some time, they're having some really amazing updates, and even going as far as to adding another map, another game mode, and a completely different way to play. Honestly, learning this, I am pretty damn impressed with Blackout. On top of that, it's not as crazy as it may seem. One thing that I've talked about on this channel before is that when a Call of Duty game is made, multiplayer is actually almost a second thought. What I mean by that is the multiplayer isn't actually started until about a year left in the development of the game. So a year before release is when the development of multiplayer actually begins. Of course, this is going to be different from studio to studio, but it's actually one of the last things they actually develop. Reason being, before that, they have to create the art style for the game, the gameplay mechanics, and of course, every other little detail. After that, they begin building the multiplayer, the balance for it, the maps, and everything we just previously talked about. However, to make things even worse, and one thing a lot of people who play Call of Duty don't know, originally this game was set to come out in November, not October. Why did it get pushed back? It was because of the launch of Red Dead Redemption 2, and Activision worried if they launched around the same time, Red Dead 2 would take away from the audience of Black Ops 4, which is honestly probably true, so they pushed the release of Black Ops 4 up by a month. This means one less month to develop the game, and even less time to actually test it and make sure it's working properly before launch. So at the launch of the game, it led to a lot of, well, this.
Woo! We're so close. Chat, listen, we are about to go into this boss fight.
At the launch of the game, there was blue screens galore. No matter what mode you were playing, Blackout, multiplayer, and especially zombies, blue screens were everywhere. And there's definitely a reason for that, and it comes down to QA testing. And no, QA isn't questions and answers, it is quality assurance. These are people who are paid to test every aspect of the game and essentially try to break it. Try to figure out what's wrong with it so the developers can actually go ahead and fix it. Now, the problem with what we just talked about is the development cycle was incredibly short, which means the amount of time to test quality assurance was also even shorter, which meant that these people who didn't actually work for Treyarch, they were hired from a third-party company, were then forced, well, not technically forced, they were asked to work overtime, working 12-hour shifts on, 12-hour shifts off, 12-hour shifts on, 12-hour shifts off, often for 7 days a week. This was not forced, but expected, if you understand what I mean there. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is not something that's just limited to the games industry, and I think that's something that this article doesn't really get across. I have a really close friend who is a computer systems engineer for essentially a robotics company, and of course, they have QA as well. And I was talking to him, asking him a bunch of questions about it, and he said that this exact same thing goes down in his company as well, where the QA people close to the launch of a product are working endless hours and paid much less money than the actual computer system engineers who are actually working on it. To take it even a step further, oftentimes these QA testers sometimes have the same credentials as the engineers, but aren't lucky. What I mean by that is the person he was talking about is a QA tester, however, has their computer engineering degree, but is from India. That computer engineering degree from India does not work in Canada, so even though she's probably as smart as the people working in the regular computer engineering, she has a less paying job and has to work shittier hours because of it. Very similar to what we are seeing here in the video game industry. Now, I will say, based off of this article, it does seem that it's quite amplified in the video game industry, especially as it says that a lot of these QA testers were paid barely over minimum wage, around $13 an hour. And if you know anything about LA, where Treyarch is, there is a very high cost of living there, and because of that, a lot of these people couldn't even afford to live properly while working in this pretty shitty environment, for lack of a better way of explaining it. Now, the article then goes on to explain the conditions that the QA testers had to work in, that it wasn't very lovely whatsoever. And on top of that, talks about how members of Treyarch and people working at Treyarch got bonuses based off of how well Treyarch's game, Black Ops 4, actually did. And with this explanation, it explains the implementation of microtransactions. And as they interviewed the developers of the game, they explained that this is not something they want in their game. What they want is as many people playing this masterpiece that they believe they've made as possible. And they know that microtransactions actually end up deterring that. The decision to add these microtransactions is implemented by Activision, especially the executives at Activision. And to take it even a step further, something personally I didn't even know, Activision not only decides what these microtransactions are, they also decide the setting and place of a lot of the Call of Duty games. An excellent example of this goes back to Blackout. Blackout originally was not supposed to be called Blackout, but Activision stepped in and told them that, hell yeah, this thing is called Blackout. On top of that, the game that Sledgehammer made, Call of Duty World War II, it actually wasn't their decision to go back to World War II. It was Activision's. They have made all these decisions behind the scene and make it seem like the developers are the ones that actually make these decisions. It's really sketchy when you really look at it. And it kind of leaves me with one remaining question. What would these Call of Duty games be like if Activision didn't have their dirty hands all over them? Would these games be masterpieces that weren't skewed by these microtransactions? Or would we be seeing the exact same thing we see today? Because once again, you got to remember, the developers are still getting paid bonuses based off of how well the games do. It's a big question I don't have the answer to. But the final thing this leaves us with is Black Ops 5. With the extreme crunch of Black Ops 4 and that being a 3-year development, what does this leave us with Call of Duty 2020? Personally, what I would like to see is Call of Duty take a step back and delay their games. Make them so they're on every 2 years or every 3 years even. This makes it so that the games as a service model that they are pushing throughout the past few Call of Duty games, especially with Black Ops 4 having updates every week, would make a lot more sense. That way the game at launch is something completely different than the finished game 2 to 3 years later. But when the game cycle is only 1 year, and after every year they implement a new Call of Duty game, it doesn't really give them a chance to fully implement the games as a service model and really make it amazing. But that's just my opinion, and I want to hear what you think down in the comments below. This is probably one of the most interesting articles about the video game industry I've ever read, and I wanted to tell you the story the best way possible, so hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, I would love it if you could hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel and want to stay up to date on all my videos, the best way to do so is make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure you have notifications turned on. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I actually really enjoyed making this one, so I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, guys, peace out.
We are reaching for the stars, but we're making this too